Hello, everybody. I am really excited to be here for today's Throwback Thursday, where we are going to be reviewing foundational concepts and really being able to talk about anything that the audience might want to talk about. I want to excuse myself a little bit. I have been suffering with some hay fever, allergy, congestion junk. So my voice hasn't been great, but if I start hacking up some nasty stuff, please just say a prayer or send me good vibes or whatever, and we'll just keep moving right along. So my inspiration for today's episode was I received an email from a listener who asked me, this individual had listened to the Why Sarah Left the Church episode in Unpacking Mormonism, specifically the episode on my concerns with the practice of polygamy and what that really meant for us as Mormons with regards to what living a polygamous lifestyle in the next life or in heaven might look like. And the question that this listener had for me is that actually doctrine? And one of the things that they explained in their email was that they didn't feel like they could go to family and ask that question, because if they went to family and asked the question, they would get the normal Mormon answer of, well, some things we just don't understand in this life, put it on the shelf, we'll come to know what that actually means and what that looks like at a later date. And they really wanted the answer is that doctrine. And so it gave me the opportunity to explain to this listener what the doctrine was and where they could find it. And that, yes, we do believe in polygamy. However, the idea of me, popping out a baby constantly in the next kingdom was, not necessarily doctrine, but that the practice of polygamy is doctrine in the Mormon Church. And their response back to me was full of dissonance, which is natural and normal. That is not a bad thing. I think that as humans, and for those of us in the ex-Mormon space, especially, we're like, oh, that person is having cognitive dissonance. And we say it as though it's got this negative connotation, like it's bad or wrong or unhealthy. And that's not the case at all. Cognitive dissonance is natural. And so I really wanted to dig in today on what is cognitive dissonance. Let's review this. This is also going to be really helpful for those who listen to the Unpacking Mormonism and other religious trauma podcast, because as we get ready to gear up here in the next couple of weeks, we're doing our cult series where Mason and I are going to really dig in and identify why so many people feel like the Mormon Church is a cult, and kind of give you the information so that you, the listener, can decide on that. We're going to be talking about cognitive dissonance again over the summer quite a bit. So I feel like this is a really good time to kind of identify what cognitive dissonance is. And so, Alex, if you can pull up our definition, the Oxford definition of cognitive dissonance. So this is it's a psychology noun. So meaning that this is a term that we use in psychology to describe the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change. Now, this definition, while it's an Oxford thing, is accurate, it kind of doesn't really clarify what is cognitive dissonance. And so the next meme that I prepared for our show today is, what are some cognitive dissonant types? And really, I feel like these types are more like examples. So, the Lumen Learning says that these are the 5 types of cognitive dissonance. And I'll just read this for those that are going to be hearing this on podcast later rather than watching the live show. Lumen Learning says there are 5 primary types of cognitive dissonance. Post-decisional dissonance. So this says I made a decision and then I have dissonance, and we're going to talk about what that is here later. Dissonance from wanting something we can't have. Dissonance due to inconsistency between attitude and behavior. This could also be belief and behavior. Dissonance due to an inadequate justification. That things aren't fair, the justification you're giving me or the explanation you're giving me doesn't make sense. And then dissonance due to an inconsistency between commitment and information. I think that one kind of fills in that religious one a little bit better. And then this says, people invested in a given perspective shall, when confronted with contrary evidence, expend great effort to justify retaining the challenged perspective. And we're going to talk about that because that shifts us into something that we call cognitive bias, which we can talk about at another day. So neither of these definitions or these examples really explain what dissonance is. And so I want to kind of give you the musical example. When I'm playing a chord or a dissonance in music, you get kind of these two sounds that aren't necessarily comfortable to listen to. Like they clash a little bit. And we hear this a lot in like music that, suspenseful music, something's coming up, or you'll hear it. I remember playing some chords like when I was in band in high school or in college, and we would play these songs and they would end on a dissonance, meaning that the audience didn't know that they were supposed to clap because the song maybe didn't sound like it was over or the chord didn't resolve. And so it kind of left you with an unfinished, uncomfortable emotion. And it's that feeling that we're talking about that really describes what dissonance is. It is the experience of discomfort or of conflict inside our brain that happens when something doesn't feel familiar. So it's not a bad thing. It is an informative thing. Cognitive dissonance, the experience and the physiology of dissonance is our brain's way of alerting us to the fact that what we are experiencing or discussing or learning about, or the way that we've behaved or a decision that we made feels outside of the norm. And it's that amygdala tickle that's like, hey, this isn't quite threatening, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And so you get a feeling of discomfort, or as if something isn't resolving, or as there's something maybe off a little bit or wrong about this. Cognitive dissonance is a natural thing. So when I say that the readers or my listeners' response to my email of this is doctrine, and then their experience of dissonance was what they were describing to me demonstrated that they were very uncomfortable and shocked with the information that they had received because they didn't realize that that was what they had believed in. And due to a personal experience that they shared with me, it was a very triggering doctrine. So cognitive dissonance is something that we need to be aware of in ourselves so that we can learn how to respond to it. So if we pull up again that quote, Alex, of the 5 types of dissonance, that very end of it, when confronted with contrary evidence. So I'm sorry, let me start at where it says people. I'm pointing at it so that those of you who are following along can see. Point. That doesn't help you, does it? Sorry. So at the right in the middle of this meme, excuse me for a minute. Excuse me. I hope none of you catch this crap. So right there in the middle of the meme, it says people invested in a given perspective shall, when confronted with contrary evidence, expend great effort to justify retaining the challenged perspective. We see this a lot in challenging religious trauma or trauma in general. Anytime that there is a status quo that we believe in, and then we get new information and we begin to shift, it's normal for our brain to fight against that. So for example, something that I think most of us can relate to is that I'm 42, and when I was being raised, the norm was that children got spanked when they were naughty. It was also pretty normal that my parents, they fed me, they made sure I had a home and the door was unlocked, but I didn't come home until the streetlights came on. My mom was not aware of my whereabouts at any given moment most of the time. Like if I was going to go to a friend's house and hang out, she knew I was with that friend. But I didn't have to necessarily go tell her I was going to go explore the wash behind my house, or that we were going to go up on a weekend to the elementary school and play, or the intermediate school and play on the playground equipment. My mom would not have known my exact whereabouts because I was raised in a different time period with different parental expectations. Nobody would have given my parents a hard time if they decided that I needed to get swatted on the butt pretty severely in public at a grocery store. That would have been considered the norm. But today, if you see a parent swatting the shit out of their kid's butt in the middle of the grocery store, there's going to be a lot of discomfort. There's going to be a lot of opinion and thought that goes into that because today's society is not one that advocates for that type of punishment. And I know that many of the listeners are going to have opinions as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And honestly, we could talk about discipline. I know that would go great with our Raising Crazy, Growing Up to Show Up listener group that might be joining us today. And definitely something that we've covered on that podcast. So don't necessarily want to get derailed, but I want to kind of illustrate the point that my parents would have experienced cognitive dissonance and did experience a lot of cognitive dissonance when I started using timeouts as a disciplinary action for my kids because it was new and it didn't make sense to them. And their brain naturally resisted because what they had been taught and told from the time they were itty bitty is that when a kid is disrespectful, you swat their butt and it's over. So I want us to recognize that utilizing the term, I see this in social media a lot where it's like, well, you're experiencing dissonance right now. So if you've ever read that or said that, chances are so are you, because it is a very natural and normal thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't want you to judge this as right or wrong, good or bad, righteous or evil. Dissonance is informative. And as we take the physiological experiences of discomfort, and as we get curious about what that could mean, it gives us better chances of opening our mind to the benefits of the new information. Something that I absolutely love about scientific inquiry is that science is open to shifting its perspective with new data. And that data, I mean, we're going to test the data. We're going to get curious about the data. We're going to look at the pros and the cons. We're going to have lots of people say, yeah, we're seeing the same results. But over time, scientific theory shifts with new data. We want our brains to be the same way. We want ourselves to be adaptable as new, accurate information comes in. And this is true whether we're talking about shifting religious beliefs or if we're talking about shifting the way we approach certain tasks in the workplace. There's a lot of dissonance when computers came in and took over the old way of doing things. And it's been really fascinating to me to see how my children communicate with their friends versus how I did, versus how my parents did, versus how my parents still do. Although I'm not in that place a lot, or my grandparents still do, versus the way that my kids do. My grandparents are much more comfortable talking to us on the telephone rather than via text. And my kids prefer text messaging. Again, this is the adaptability for changes. Some change is good, some change is bad, some changes just change. And so I want to encourage you to pay attention to those physiological indicators so that you can adapt in healthy ways when new information is presented to you. So Alex, do we have any questions today? I know that we didn't get this episode advertised as well as we did last week, so I don't know if we have anybody listening in today during the live show. So there are no questions at this time. So I'm just going to put a plug in. Oh, I've got a question all of a sudden, very quickly. I got a no questions and then a question. That was really fast. So how do you respond when confronted with a peer displaying some cognitive dissonance in the workplace? Great question, Amanda. Thank you so much. So yeah, when somebody is in an active state of dissonance, it means that their amygdala is fired up. We've got to get through that feeling of discomfort before we're in a place where we can necessarily make healthy and well thought out decisions about how to respond to that. And so I would say that we need to be able to respect the individual's dissonance, that we need to be gentle with it, that we need to acknowledge it. We need to be able to say, hey, I can see that this information might be making you uncomfortable, or this is kind of a new way of thinking about things, and that can be really frustrating. So we're going to identify the emotion first. So one of the things that I teach my clients is emotions always come first. And so when you're responding to somebody in a state of dissonance, you want to be able to acknowledge the level of discomfort that they are feeling and give them the opportunity to express, yeah, this makes me really uncomfortable. Something that in my Unpacking Mormonism episode, Mason, I believe, I haven't actually listened to it yet, so I might be lying to you right now, but I believe that Mason talked about an experience that he had with his parents visiting us recently. And so I'll just kind of give you a little snippet of what happened there. But my mother-in-law actually came to me and asked me my reasons for leaving the Mormon church in a curious way. And this is the first time she's been able to do this, in a curious way where she was seeking understanding. And as I shared the information with her, I was able to consistently say, I know that some of these stories are really uncomfortable. I would have said things like, I know that a lot of this is maybe really hard to believe. And then I was also able to express to her that I felt devalued when she was refusing to look at some of the source material that I was presenting, that I felt like, what's the point of sharing things? I don't need you to agree, but I would appreciate it if you were willing to look at the same source material and at least acknowledge that I've put a lot of thought and effort into coming to the conclusions that I've come to, even if she disagreed with them. But the reason that Mom and I were able to stay in a very calm state while we discussed a very difficult topic was because we were acknowledging each other's level of discomfort in the conversation, because the information that I was presenting to her were things that she doesn't believe in, doesn't believe that they happened in the way that they said, because she's not looked at the same stuff that I've looked at, because unfortunately in the Mormon church, anything that does not reflect positively on the Mormon church is considered anti. Not everything, but most things would be considered anti-Mormon if it doesn't reflect positively on the church. And so the Mormon church has set its members up to feel guilty for looking at sources not given the stamp of approval of the Mormon church, which is a red flag that we'll talk about when we talk about our cults. But the reason my mother-in-law and I were able to have a very productive conversation was because we were acknowledging the level of discomfort, that dissonance during that information exchange. So the best way to work with people who are struggling with dissonance is to give them the space and the time that they need to work through those uncomfortable emotions and to be patient. So I hope that answers your question. So thank you so much. Is there any other questions or anything that we've got going behind the scenes? Alex, going to shoot me that answer in the chat. That would be great. No other questions. So I just want to say thank you so much then for joining us today. We have a small live audience, but we are getting some traction in some of these live shows later on as the weeks go on, as people come back and watch the show. So please, if you like what you're seeing, give us a like, give us a share. And of course, if you have questions that you would like to see discussed on our Throwback Thursday, or anything really, if you have a question for me, it doesn't have to be about mental health. It can be anything. No topic is off limits. Please feel free to reach out to us at our website, www.daisygirlcommunications.com, or through email at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. Thanks so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.